The smooth jazz intro that can only mean it's Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. It must be time for another teissTalk. I'm your host, author, and investigative journalist, Jeff White. It's great to be with you here at another teissTalk. We are live every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. All the teissTalks are archived on the Teiss website, so you can go and have a look at those, of course. But why would you want to? Why be here with us live? Already people getting involved in the chat. Hello to all of you. Hello to our regular viewers. Hello if it's your first time. If it is your first time, do pipe up. We may well reward you with a teissTalk mug if you're a first timer here on teissTalk. We love new members. And also the Q&A tab is there as well if you want to drop in any questions to us all. By the way, if you're listening to the podcast version of this teissTalk, hello to you, coming in your ears. But if you would like to see the full unexpurgated version of this teissTalk, do head over to the teissTalk website where you can see the video and see our lovely faces as we talk about all of that stuff as well. We have got a fantastic program lined up for you today with some really, really good speakers. We're going to be talking later on about risk-based versus compliance-based security programs, which I'll be honest, when I saw the topic, I sort of thought, but actually getting into it is quite a feisty one, and I think it's going to be quite a feisty debate. So do brace yourselves with those for that debate coming up. Paul has spotted that I'm not wearing the bow tie. I'll be honest, Paul, I'll be honest with you. I did a video for, it was Vice News I did a video for, and I went into the office, and being Vice News, they're all about 12 years old, and I just looked like a twat. I really did. Look, the bow tie I thought was a cool, groovy little feature, but actually I just looked like an idiot, so I've dropped the bow tie. It was a phase we went through. But anyway, maybe it'll come back. Who knows? But look, as I say, we are going to be discussing risk-based versus compliance-based stuff later on. But first, I want to have a chat about some stuff that's been in the news, and I want to bring on to do that our first guest. We're going to be hearing later on, though, by the way, from Raza Sadiq, who's Head of Operational Risk at MCube, Benjamin Call, who's VP Cybersecurity at Coates, and Jamie Moles, Senior Technical Marketing Manager at ExtraHop. But first, we're going to hear from our first guest on this, who is Chief Information Security Officer, CISO at Sokin, and that's Todd Wade, who is joining us now from indeed wherever Todd is joining us from your basement, from the looks of it. Are you incarcerated?
I have a new office, and it's in an attic. But it's,
right.
But I since I'm working at home a lot, it works out quite well. Good to see you again, Jeff.
Yes, indeed, Todd. It's great to have you on. If only for the fact that having you on here means I get to talk to somebody else about their book as opposed to trying to plug my own book. You're in print. Tell us about your books coming out.
The book is on cybercrime, particularly cyber fraud, cyber extortion. It's a topic I'm quite passionate about. It's an area I am seeing, as everyone is, an explosion. And I think it's an area that needs to be talked about further, not just from businesses, but also from individuals and families. Yeah. The title is Cybercrime, How to Protect Your Business, Your Family, and Yourself. Released in June.
And when it's out? In June?
In June. Yep, June. It's being put out by the British Computer Society and available for pre-order on Amazon next week.
Fantastic. All right. Yes, all right. The Saki comments saying, do I have a book out? Yes, I also have a book out, but I've politely not mentioned that.
But look, I'll mention it. It's a fantastic book. One of the best cybercrime books I've read. And everyone should read it. Crime.com. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah. Thank you for that, Tom. We can do love-ins about the books all afternoon, but let's move on. But listen, I wish you best of luck with your book. I really do.
Great,
but look, let's get to the topic in hand, or actually let's get to the sort of news issue in hand that we're going to talk about, because we've been scouting out, like looking for what's been breaking in the news, and the thing, Todd, that you and I were particularly keen to talk about was the Mandiant report, their M-Trends report from this year. So Mandiant bring together all of their visibility, which is pretty good. I mean, let's face it, Mandiant have quite a lot of visibility, and we had a look through the report. Anything, Todd, that stood out to you from this from the Mandiant?
What was the leading insight for me is they're still seeing exploits are still the number one cause of intrusions. Yeah. And exploits are known vulnerabilities most of the time. There are things that should be done on the security stack to secure your environment, and still not being done across numerous industries and companies.
And that's exploits, which for me stood in contrast to phishing. So it was exploits as opposed to phishing seemed to be the main thing. Have I got that right? Have I understood that correctly?
Well, my understanding of exploits, they're taking advantage of known exploits to hack into systems. So there are numerous exploits out there. Companies are coming up with patches, security things in order to remediate these, but clearly companies aren't addressing this. And this is just an easy one for hackers, for cyber criminals to get into, because it's a known pathway into a company.
Yeah. I suppose, as unlike the phishing email, you don't have to sort of have much social engineering skill. You're not trying to social engineer somebody into doing something. You've just, as you say, you've identified the vulnerability, you exploit it, and there you go, bang, you're in.
Yep, for sure. And then you have a whole series of range of other attacks you can do once you're inside.
Yeah, interesting. Another thing that stood out to me from this report was they talk a lot about dwell time, Mandiant. They're like, dwell time, and they were saying, this is a big success, dwell time, because dwell time's gone down from, I think, 27 days to 23 or something like that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's good news, but look at drilling down a bit deeper into it. As an interesting picture for ransomware, the dwell time has gone from the time from when you get hit to when you spot it went down and down. But for other types of non-ransomware, it was actually still quite high. It was actually higher than the average, far higher than ransomware. Did you spot that? What did you make of that?
I would say that's because companies are focusing on ransomware. That is their number one concern right now for companies, ransomware across the board, and they're actively looking. And it was encouraging to see such a dramatic drop. I mean, I think it was 78 to 28 days, something like that, which is really surprising to see that kind of progress in a year's time, which is great to see.
The other thing that struck me about that, the dwell time thing with ransomware, was surely with ransomware, it's pretty obvious pretty soon, isn't it? I mean, if you get hit by ransomware, the extortion messages come up, and it's obvious you've been hit by ransomware.
I wish that was the case. Attackers are going to be inside to scope out your systems for a long time, as long as they can, because they want maximum damage. No criminal wants to go ahead and just ransomware out their first computer that they attack. But that doesn't really give them what they want. What they want is maximum value, and maximum value means hitting you where you're going to be most vulnerable. And so that's why you're not going to see the attacker attack for quite some time if they don't need to.
Right. Okay. Interesting stuff. By the way, our teissTalk is beavering away in the background, sticking in links to the reports. If you haven't read the Mandiant report, it is there. Other reports from other cybersecurity companies are available. We're vendor neutral here on teissTalk, but if you do want to take a look, it's there. And by the way, we've had a shift in the teissTalk. The teissTalk role has been given over to a new person. Been a change of gender as well about the teissTalk. So I don't know I don't know how you sex an elf, basically. I've no idea how that happens. But we have a team of people who beaver away in the background tirelessly on teissTalk to help us. So thanks again to our incoming teissTalk for all your work. The links to Security Boulevard's report on the Mandiant report is there. Oh, the other thing that came up from that, Todd, that was interested in that report was there was a section, it's a bit lower down, so I don't know whether people got to it, but targeting virtualization infrastructure, so hackers going after virtual machines. And this tied into something that I've been banging on about for ages, which is the central point of failure being the data center, and the idea that hackers might one day breach a data center and escalate and get into all the VMs sitting in a data center. And I looked at that and thought, well, maybe it's happening already. Is it happened and I've missed it, or does this not happen? What do you think of it?
There's a term that's commonly used, the crown jewels. They're after your crown jewels. What is the most valuable assets for your company? And when you design a security strategy, you have to understand where those crown jewels are to put added protection. And that's something companies struggle with because where their crown jewels are, many companies just don't know. And so this is an avenue, like you said, in the data centers, by getting virtual machines, or oftentimes the crown jewels aren't protected the way they should be. And it provides a free avenue for hackers to get into and exploit.
But the logic I've always heard with data centers is, because they're run by people like Microsoft and Amazon, frankly, they spend huge amounts on the security, of them, and the security of the virtual machine itself, the actual virtual machine running, is the responsibility of the customer. The bare metal on which it's running, the machines and the building and everything, are the responsibility of the cloud provider. But I always thought, well, there's surely a weak point in there somewhere. If you can get into the Microsoft or the Amazon side of it, and then somehow get into all those virtual machines, or get into one virtual machine and manage to break out into the other ones in a data center. That to me struck me as an obvious line of attack. But is there something I'm missing in that?
If you're talking about a major cloud provider like AWS or Google, that would be a serious problem. If that's the case, a very, very serious problem. If you're talking about the average company that just runs data centers, that doesn't have a carry-on impact on other companies, that's a different story.
Yeah. Interesting. Simon Yakans pointed out, yes, don't put that in your search engine. Yes, Simon, I've not been Googling how to break into a data center. Certainly not logged into Google. Really interesting stuff. Oh, and the other thing I found, I know about you, Todd, in this mandate report was the supply chain issues, just the growth in supply chain, which shouldn't surprise us, but seeing it in black and white was pretty striking.
Oh, I touched upon this in my book. The social engineering and the success rate for supply chain attacks is astonishing. And it is something that these have been around for ages, but how they attack is new on the supply chain side. And the fact that it's number 2 on their list was also surprising, showing how much it's impacting companies across the board. Everyone's getting impacted by supply chain attacks. And it's just a real challenge one, since everyone's getting more interconnected. Your suppliers are just increasing, and your risk to these suppliers, because you're connected to them, increases as well.
It's interesting. Mind you, actually, it did say that quite a proportion of those supply chain attacks, particularly in 2021, was SolarWinds. So SolarWinds actually made a huge amount, because obviously, so again, it sort of skews. We'll come on to this later in the obviously when we talk about this, but I wondered about that in terms of this risk-based approach, because let's say, for example, I read this mandate report right now and I start making decisions, go, okay, supply chain's where it's at. I'm going to do loads and loads on supply chain. Is there a risk with the risk-based approach that I'm looking in the rearview mirror? I'm going, okay, that's the risk from 2021. I'm just going to work on it. Is there a risk that I'm overplaying? I'm overestimating the supply chain attack risk because I'm basing it on last year's SolarWinds hell. Do you see what I mean, Tom?
Yeah, but when you're looking at a risk-based approach, let's just look at the supply chain risk. Numerous companies are identifying this as a major risk for the companies, and they are allocating more security resources towards addressing this, because it's not a clear cut. It is a challenging problem for everyone, and it is a growing problem. And so when you do a risk-based approach, this is identifying this as a key risk. This means you need to spend, you identify this as a key risk. Now you know where to focus your energy towards this particular risk in terms of remediating. Whereas you have other risks that aren't as daunting as that, whereas you're looking at, okay, where do you spend your resources at? You're going to spend them on the resources of your key risk that align with your business interests. You're not going to, if you do the opposite of that, you're kind of going in a different direction, and that's not necessarily where you should be spending your money or your time for the company, securing the company.
Yeah, interesting. Listen, fascinating stuff. Let's bring in our other panelists on this, because we've got them patiently waiting in the background. We have Raza Sadiq, who's head of operational risk at MCube, joining us. Benjamin Call, who is VP cybersecurity at Coates, and Moles, senior technical marketing manager at Extra Hop. Welcome to all of you who popped up all as one. Come to you first, Jamie, simply because you're first on my screen. That actually does look like you're in a base. It doesn't look like you're in the lofty areas of Todd. It looks like you're squirreled away somewhere in a basement. Where are you?
I'm in my home office, which is like it's a cross between my man cave, because there's all my fun stuff, and it's where I work from. I have it currently set up. I'm doing some capture the flag stuff on my week off. So I'm in a dark and dingy environment because it's best for hacking.
Nice. When you say your fun stuff, is that NSFW, or can you talk?
Oh no, fun stuff. Like, so I've got all my computer games over there, my Terry Pratchett books there, my Rubik's cubes all over the place, all sorts of stuff.
That kind of fun stuff.
Right? Yeah, legitimate fun stuff.
Okay, good stuff. Benjamin, you're next on my screen. How are you, and where are you joining us from?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. So I am joining from North Carolina. So you'll hear from my accent, the American accent. So again, and home office as well. No basement. All I did was when I started working from home, I decided to kick my kid out of a bedroom and decided to just set up shop in one of the bedrooms. So
Right.
I have a nice window, so I get a nice view, a little bit of sunshine.
Nice. Very, very good. And Coates, you work for Coates, which I must admit I hadn't come across, and Googling it was somewhat tricky because just Googling Coates brings up a lot of entrants. But go on, tell us a quick bit about the company. What do you guys do?
So like you, a lot of people haven't heard about Coates, but Coates is a 250-year-old company, industrial thread manufacturing. Headquarters is in London or in Uxbridge. And again, industrial thread and yarn manufacturer.
Yeah. And so it just wouldn't strike me that was a sort of cyber risk, but obviously having done these programs for long enough, I can kind of second guess the answer. But what is the sort of cyber risk for industrial yarn manufacture?
Well, it's any business. It's any business that is operating for profit is going to have systems. We're going to have information that other people want to get their hands on. They want to get, we're $1 billion publicly traded organization as well. Therefore, we're going to be targeted just like everybody else is. I can sit there and say security through obscurity. People haven't heard of us, so they're not going to be targeting us. But the fact is, if you're connected to the internet, you're going to be targeted as well, whether it's opportunistic, whether it truly is a target or not. So we're going to have very similar risks with our risk landscape, threat landscape, as everybody else that's on here. Even though we are manufacturing, we're industrial, we're in the textile, all of that is going to have the same threat landscape as everybody else who's listening or viewing this.
Yeah, very true. I suppose, you've got a client list hidden somewhere and a customer list somewhere that you don't particularly want to.
And employee data as well. So
yeah, good stuff. Thanks for that, Benjamin. Interesting. Raza, how are you? Where are you? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm in Guildford, sunny Guildford, at the M-Cube offices. I'm in the office. Nice. So yeah, beautiful. A really nice stream down the road. Beautiful parks. It's gorgeous.
Fantastic. It was good to hear somebody's happy with their working environment in the office. Raza, I'll stay with you then first of all. We've touched on a couple of the points in the Mandiant report. Anything else that struck you from it, or bits that Todd and I have already talked about that you want to pick up on?
Yeah, I was just thinking, the dwell time, which I found quite interesting, and of course the supply chain, but also the resilience piece and the recovery piece that the report talks about at the end. The dwell time, I just want to go back to that a little bit. In terms of the response time that we're seeing on external threats and et cetera in the US as compared to Europe, there's a marked difference. It's actually half, in terms of the time frames.
That's
involved.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm just trying to, I was very curious about that in terms of cultural aspects of it. And considering we have somebody from North Carolina, maybe they can elaborate on this or shed some light on this. Why is it taking the Americans less time to report as compared to the Europeans? Yeah. I'm just trying to figure that out.
Benjamin, any thoughts on that? Yeah, I'll be interested in that. Let's pass it over to you and then we'll open it up.
No, and I really think it just comes down to the regulatory bodies that have been out here saying if you have breaches that they've got to be reported. Sarbanes-Oxley has been in place for a long time. I know it doesn't have regulatory, but it's just been this focus for the last decade or more of putting a focus on the security. And I like to joke around with my EU counterparts of the Americans have focused on security a little bit longer, while the Europeans have focused on privacy. So Americans a little bit further on security. We've got to catch up on privacy. The EU folks are further on privacy, going to catch up a little bit on the security. Not saying either approach was right or wrong, but that's just my general opinion.
Interesting perspective. Yeah, it's interesting, that one. Jamie, what do you make of this in terms of dwell time, different areas, dwell time in general? What do you make of this?
Yeah, well, there's a few bits in there that I found interesting. Going back to the very original APT1 report that Mandiant produced, when the dwell time was like 240 days or something. And now we're seeing the dwell times drastically reduced down into less than a month. I mean, that's got to be a success story, no matter how you read it. It just tells us that people are doing a better job generally in the way that they're managing the risk in their organizations and the protection they're putting in place. Now, the question is that down to technologies they've implemented? Is it down to processes they've implemented? Or is it down to the fact that the governments are cracking down on organizations who have breaches and scaring the hell out of the board and making them actually do a good job? It's probably a combination of all three. I think one of the other things that I found interesting in the report was the malware section, when it talked about the types of malware families that are being seen. And by far the biggest one is what they're calling beaconing, which is actually Cobalt Strike, which is a particular commercial penetration testing tool, which is very, very good. And it's frankly, I won't say it's a nightmare, but for those of us in the security vendor business, it is problematic because it is very, very good at what it does and the levels of customization it can provide, and the fact that version 3 of it was leaked a couple of years ago, and now all of the threat actors have copies of Cobalt Strike in their libraries. And we see leaks for the newer versions coming out all the time. I think 4.4 was leaked a few months ago. 4.6 has just been released. But it's a powerful tool and it's everywhere.
That's the thing. Yeah, Jamie, it's interesting you say that. I was talking to one of my contacts a little while ago. The problem is now identifying attribution becomes really hard, identifying who you've been hit with, because they're all using Cobalt Strike. And it's like, well, you've got a Cobalt Strike infection. And now they're trying to do workarounds of classifying different servers to try and group servers together. To try and
team servers.
Because they're all using the same tool. You've got to find some other way to work that out. Interesting stuff. Well, as I say, the links to the Mandiant stuff is in the chat. And as I say, other security companies' reports are available. We thought we'd pick up on Mandiant because it's an interesting one from this week. Also in the chat are the LinkedIn profiles for our various guests and speakers, so do connect with them over on LinkedIn. I want to sort of pivot seamlessly in as much as we can to the topic in hand. And Todd, can I come back to you on this? Because we're going to be talking about it's risk-based versus compliance-based practice. And I just... anyway... Todd, firstly, set out your stall on this one for me, and then we'll go from there. How about that?
It's interesting that a lot of the founders and executives I talk to at different companies oftentimes think if they're compliant with like PCI compliant or something else, they are secure. But coming at this from a risk-based angle, compliance doesn't mean you're secure. There's a distinct difference there. And by looking at a risk-based approach, you can focus on your key risk at your company and put in strengthen and put in the systems or security tools you need that focuses on where you feel your greatest risks are. Whereas compliance is just compliance across the board. And so while a company may be compliant, it doesn't mean they're secure, but they can go an extra length of secure by taking a risk-based approach. And I think that's how I view the differences between the two.
Yeah, I mean, Todd, just staying with you for a second. I mean, I get the feeling that in the security community, the idea that you should be doing risk-based approach is just accepted. I can't imagine people I speak to who wouldn't have that view. But am I misguided there? Are the people still in the security community who go, actually, compliance-based is still fine?
I would say for sure in the security community, most of it are going to be risk-based approach. I work closely with the ISF, who runs there's something called the IRAM, which is a risk-based approach for managing your security posture. The challenge you have is many executives. Many executives want that stamp of approval. They want that compliance box, and then they think, well, am I being sold a gold-plated solution by adding more security? If I'm already compliant, shouldn't that be enough? And so this is the challenge I think a lot of security professionals have on how to address that.
This thing, I mean, so Jamie, can I come to you on this? Because when we were chatting about this yesterday, when we got together prior to this panel, there was an interesting question around compliance. and how compliance works, it does at least give you a framework. I think that's possibly one of the appeals of compliance-based. Like, yes, it's tick boxing, but at least I know which boxes I'm ticking. The problem with risk is, where does it stop? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. So I've been following this topic for a couple of years now, and every time I attend a CISO dinner or we run one at Xshop or whatever, I always ask the people around the table the question about risk or compliance-based programs, and you get varying answers, obviously. But the interesting thing is that certain industries are mandated to have compliance-based programs. So healthcare, financial, and things like that. So they have a huge investment in running a compliance-based program. It is the status quo. And if you're a small organization, a small to medium-sized organization who's just starting to move into building out a security program, and maybe you're not too experienced about it, you're going to want help with that. And so you're going to go out and you're going to investigate security programs, and you're going to come across things like CIS and NIST and other frameworks that help you understand your security. And maybe you sell things and through a website, and therefore you have to be PCI compliant and things like that. There are a whole raft of handheld solutions or hand-holding solutions, if you like, to get yourself some level of security coverage in the name of compliance, if you like. And all of these give you best practices. So, you're going to go out, let's say you're a Microsoft house, you're going to go out and you're going to get Microsoft server hardening standards and put them on your system. You might do the same for Linux, you might do the same for your web servers. And you're going to get a feeling of comfort by going down a checklist that says, you know what, better people than me have secured their systems and this is their advice. So I'm going to go with this. And you're going to go back to your management and you'll go back to your bosses and say, look, good people who are good at this, tell us this is what we should do. We are doing it. And then you get some third party to come in and audit you, and you've ticked all the boxes. You're good. No one ever got fired. So no one ever got fired for passing an audit, did they? So compliance is a good thing. What Todd said really resonated, I think, is that really compliance is the starting point. Compliance is like your basic security. Risk-based security programs, which are, I'm a security vendor, I'm all for them. They are better in my mind, but they are perhaps more advanced for some smaller companies. But a combination of the two is what is best, it would appear, depending on your organization size, culture, compliance requirements, governance requirements, and the like.
Before we go on with this, I just I'm aware we've got people watching, and I am quite intrigued as to where they sit on this. And I wonder if we could do a poll, if we could ask our incoming teissTalk, the new teissTalk, the nouveau elf. I don't know, it's nouveau elf. Anyway, whichever, the elf that we've got, the teissTalk. Could we do a poll on this question? And the poll question would be, are you more risk-based or compliance-based in your organization's approach at the moment? So is it risk-based or compliance-based? The poll panel is up there on your left-hand side, and you can go and vote in the poll, and let's just see what people say. There's no right answers or wrong answers. We are ambivalent with the answer, certainly for the moment, but I am interested into what our audience thinks. So when the poll goes up, you'll be able to vote there. Benjamin, can I come to you on this? I mean, it's an interesting point Jamie makes that, smaller organizations are going to find compliance-based a bit easier than risk-based.
Absolutely. And I really like where you started that, Jeff, saying that this is a framework. This is a starting point. And I look at a lot of these compliance ones. This is minimum standard. This isn't best standard. This is minimum. And it's you roll out some of these controls or processes, whether you're using a technology control in order to roll it out and to apply it to your organization. But I really like just saying that this is where we start. And by, better people, it's not me rolling something out based on my narrow experience, based on the things that I've done at previous organizations. Sure, I've been around for a couple of decades and done some things, but these frameworks are put together by really smart people with very broad perspectives. So they're going to come up with requirements for some areas that perhaps I've never thought about. So I really do see the value in those frameworks. But again, that's to be compliant to a certain standard. That doesn't take every type of business into account. And it doesn't take the particular threats for my organization. So if all we're doing is looking at it from a compliance based, I can sit here and say, I checked all these boxes. I should be safe. And I use safe, not secure, for a reason, which is why we really need to shift from that compliance and just say, take that risk-based approach of what else do I need to do based on what I'm seeing in my particular organization. I've already put the basics in place by rolling out this NIST framework, by rolling out the ISO 27001, got that certification. I'm good now. But then as you're doing your monitoring, what other risks are being presented and how do I put the right process in place to minimize or mitigate it?
Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, is it going to come to you on this? Is it possible, though, for organizations to use the risk-based approach to sort of shortcut or not shortcut, but to be smarter about the compliance thing they go for? Can you combine the two at the beginning, or is it generally you get your compliance-based thing sorted out and then you go on to risk afterwards?
I mean, you can look at it both ways, but where I've seen it work really beautifully is when you do the combination, because compliance will, of course, give you a set of regulations that you need to comply with. And of course, you need to, if you want to look at it from a maturity standpoint, you could, that's the building blocks. But ideally, what you want to see, and where I've seen it work really well, is that you use the compliance monitoring framework, or the plan or the actual process, but embed it within the risk assessments that you carry out, the self-risk assessments or the second line risk assurance or whatever, because you build in a questionnaire interview process, which helps to demonstrate embedding of those good practices. And that's what risk management is all about at the end of the day. How useful is it? How useful is it for the board and the management committee to see how is my control environment? Is my company efficiently run to make sure there's no leakage in terms of costs? And people talk about risk-based and they immediately think, oh my God, we'll have to pay the risk managers a lot of money. But what they don't realize is the amount of money they're actually saving from inefficient processes and also inefficient practices, just general. The amount of cost save that you can do. And I think that was also evident in the management report to a great extent. You build a resilience within your framework so that you can see that people react. The knee-jerk reaction is appropriate. You're changing behaviors at the end of the day. And if you can make it useful to the organization on the bottom line, you can demonstrate that through the risk-based assessment, you will see it pay back, tenfold in terms of the investment that you put into a risk management unit. And mature organizations and seasoned management committee members, I've always seen really work closely with the chief risk officers and the risk managers to make sure that the intentions are aligned and the politics are aligned, because the minute you see the differences in terms of your politics, it just goes wrong. And it never serves anybody at the end of the day, because the issue and the concerns are outside. And I think the dwell time that Todd talked about initially in the management report is so important. Should we not be looking at our own internal processes so that we report more quickly?
Indeed,
so I'm sorry, it's a very long answer, but I hope that answers the question.
That's fine. I want to come back to you on something, Raza, but first, the results of our poll, interestingly, 71% said they are at the moment compliance-based and 29% say risk-based. So that's interesting. So particularly from this audience, because they are generally a tech security audience. Thank you for participating in the poll. Raza, I do want to come back to you on something quickly, which is, my question would be then, are there instances in which taking a risk-based approach, you would opt not to do some compliance, obviously an optional piece of compliance, but an exercise you would normally go through? Can you look at it from a risk point of view and say, look, the risk on that's really low, let's just not bother doing it? Raza, is that something that you come across?
Not Really, I'll tell you why. Because if it's that immaterial, then you still carry it out, but you may not give it as much weightage when you do your RAG ratings or your assessment. But you still make that part of the process. And I think
Right.
that's the value addition that a risk-based approach does, is not only does it do the job, but then it actually gives you a ranking. I know there are subjectivity issues with that, in terms of how do you maintain consistency in terms of coming up with the right RAG rating, the red, amber, green rating. But if you can get that nailed down and you get consistency in terms of the quality of your reviews and insurance and everything else, and the scripting of your testing approach and everything else is well documented, then that assessment, the RAG, really helps. And that's where your dashboard and that's where your discussions and challenge at the board level makes it palatable and possible.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the boards that I've seen historically, some of them who function really well are the ones who really take on some of those challenges that they're seeing and say, okay, so what are we going to do about it? How are we going to resolve these issues? And then I've seen some boards who really don't want to know.
Yeah.
As well.
Let's come on to that. It's a good point, Benjamin. Can I come on to you on this, because point Todd made at the beginning about cybersecurity people generally being a bit more happy with the risk-based approach, but they're coming up against people in the business who have been born and bred in the compliance side and get that. So Benjamin, have you faced that, and have you got any sort of wisdom on how you move people from one to the other?
No, absolutely. It's just conversation, and it's building these relationships and the art of storytelling. And you sit here and you're explaining that even though we've got this compliance, you go up for your budget and you're like, I want to add this. Why in the world? We're already compliant. Are we not done with security at this point? And it's like, no, we're on a journey. This is a marathon, and we're going to continue to go. We're going to continue to mature. The attackers continue to mature in their tactics, and if our protections, our processes don't continue to mature, then we're going to wake up and we're going to be on the front page of whatever newspaper or whatever website you want to reference. So again, it's just having this. But when you're also taking that, I can sit here and say, this is what I think, this is what I feel, and this is where you get into qualitative versus quantitative. And even though we are compliant with whatever framework or whatever regulatory body that's out there, I can still sit here and use a quantification to say, if we were to be hit with this type of attack, this would be the impact. It's $1 million impact. I'm asking for a control of 50,000. 50,000 pounds in order to, mitigate this or, minimize it. That being able to break that out and quantify that, and that's a savings of 950,000 pounds by rolling that out. And then again, it comes down to likelihood, all of that, but all that's taken into account in the formulas. Yeah. You're able to present that, and that tells a better story.
Yeah. Interesting point. Yeah, Benjamin, I appreciate that. But Todd, I want to come to you on this, because if I'm a regulated business and I fail some of the checks I'm meant to have passed, I know I can guess what the fine is going to be based on what's happened elsewhere. I know what the regulatory action is going to be. So to talk about Benjamin's point, the quantifiableness of failing the compliance, I can kind of gather. Is that part of the problem as well with risk? Is that, as Benjamin said, it could be a £950,000 saving, but if that risk never plays out, then it's just a £50,000 spend. You see what I mean, Todd? It's for regulated businesses. They're easy that they can see the pain from non-compliance. It's harder for them to see the pain from risk that's hard to quantify.
Well, it's a valid point. Getting budget approved to meet compliance is very easy. Because in order to get to compliant, you need X amount of budget. That's what it's going to take. And so swing back around to the supply chain, it's very difficult to measure the security posture of your supply chain. Compliance gives you a measurable stat that you can show. And when you measure other companies' supply chain, so there's definite value in being compliant. But it's back to, I think Benjamin made a good point. You have to tell the story. You have to build that case. You have to illustrate to this and bring to life. If you don't do these different, mitigating steps, these are the risks you're going to face.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Chris, sorry, Jamie, I'm going to come to you. Chris has put a question in the Q&A, and Jamie, I'm going to throw it at you, and I'll see if I can get other people in, but we're slightly running up against time. Chris has said the panelists are all risk-based. Do they all think their security awareness programs for their colleagues are also risk-based? And Jamie, I just wanted to get your take on that.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, is the question asking security awareness programs given to your colleagues? Are we training internally our staff to be aware of security, and is it risk based? Well, to be honest, I've not really seen very many security awareness programs that are about compliance. Most of the ones that I've seen, and I've delivered a few in the past myself, have been about getting people to understand risk. So showing them things like how easy it is to crack their password, showing them how easy it is to create and craft a phishing email that they couldn't tell the difference between that and an email from their bank. The best security awareness programs, in my mind, are the ones that tell you a story, teach you something about the risk that you face as an individual, so that you can then appreciate better the risk that your company faces if you don't do things in the right manner. So I would say that all the good security awareness programs are risk-based. I've not seen one that purports to be compliance-based, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if you could slip an element of compliance in there to say, look, we need to do this so that the government doesn't beat us up. But it would be helpful if you knew and understood these other things so that we could do things better.
Yeah.
But I think they're all. Sorry, I was going to say that they're all compliance based. I mean, by the nature of what you're doing from a security aspect, that in itself is compliance, to make sure that you are compliant to the standards at the end of the day. I don't know. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it.
I think that's the thing. I think maybe what Chris was getting at was, and I know this has happened in organizations I work for, is you put your staff through a security awareness program so that you can tick the box of we put them through a security awareness program. Perhaps that's what he was getting at. But look, fascinating chat there, and thanks for getting involved in the Q&A, Chris. I really appreciate that question. It's interesting stuff. Look, we could go on about this for a while, but I hope you've found it of use. I'm just going to wrap up our session. I just thought I'd ask our panelists a stupid question for the end of the session. Simply come back from Easter. We're going to play a game of Would You Rather, which is I give you two options and you tell which you'd rather and why. And the question is, would you rather be able to shrink yourself down to tiny proportions, tiny microscopic proportions, or grow yourself up to be massively enormous? Todd, which would you rather, small or big?
I think tiny by a long ways. I would be a chief environmentalist there, saving the environment by being tiny.
Right, okay, Jamie, what do you reckon, big or small?
This is a dodgy question, and you don't realize why. This ties in very, very closely with some psychologists' questions that help determine whether you're a psychopath or not. And it's very, very similar to the superhero power question. Would you have Superman's powers, or would you be the Invisible Man? And if you have psychopathic traits, you're likely to want to hide. So you're likely to say, I would be Invisible Man, or in this case of this question, I would be tiny because people can't see me and I can see what they're doing. So I'm going to go with, I would like to be big. I would like to be the Hulk.
Okay. Well, I have to say, Jamie, you slightly skewed it for the other two panelists now, because if they choose tiny, they're going for the psychopath option. But I will come, Raza, to you. Which Raza, big or small?
Well, I think I'm going to go with Todd here a little bit because, I'd gone on the days of the 80s when you have this empires of risk management teams. I think the more effective you are as a risk manager, the lesser of a team that you have, but you embed the risk within the business. Like you create risk champions. So you have people accountable. So you may have a very small risk team, like Todd is saying, one person, but then have your ethos and your thinking behind risk and risk assurance embedded within every business unit. So you're working behind, but you're quite effective that way. So I wouldn't go for Ant. I was basically saying Ant-Man is probably what I would.
Ant-Man. All right. Okay. And lastly, Benjamin, what do you reckon? Would you go massive or big or small? Oh, we may have lost Benjamin, actually. I think Benjamin might have frozen, dodging, therefore, the question of whether he's a psychopath or not.
Smart man.
Smart move. Look, apologies for that. I think we have Benjamin may have frozen. He may come back, but listen, I want to thank all of our panelists. It's been a really interesting chat. An interesting chat with all of you. Todd Wade, Chief Information Security CISO at Sokin, Raza Sadiq, Head of Operational Risk at MQ, Benjamin Call, VP Cybersecurity at Coat, and Jamie Mould, Senior Technical Marketing Manager at Extra Hop. Thank you to all of you for joining us on this topic.
Thanks,
and coming up next week on Tuesday, my co-host Jenny Radcliffe takes the stage talking about testing your EQ, your emotional quotient, using emotional intelligence to retain talent and reduce cyber risk, which is a really interesting one. So do join Jenny next week. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day, a great weekend. We'll see you on another teissTalk soon. Cheerio.